Banished, forgotten, left to drift in the void, nothing more than a distant whisper in galactic history. That's what they believed when they cast humanity out, sentencing an entire species to exile beyond the known reaches of the stars. The Galactic Concord, an alliance of the most powerful civilizations, spoke of balance, of order, of ensuring that no one race could disrupt the fragile peace of the cosmos. But in truth, they feared us. They feared our rapid advancement, our relentless adaptability, our refusal to yield, and so they acted. Under the guise of justice, the conquered delivered their decree. Humanity, they claimed, was a rogue element, too unpredictable, too dangerous. Our ambitions stretched beyond the limits they imposed, our hunger for knowledge, too great to be shackled by their laws. The ruling species gathered in their pristine halls, their voices dripping with self-righteousness as they cast their votes. The verdict was unanimous. Humanity would be stripped of its worlds, its stations, its place in the galactic order. The gates to civilization were closed, the hyperlanes severed. They left us with nothing but the cold abyss. At first, they thought it would be our end. Cut off from trade, from resources, from the very infrastructure that had allowed us to flourish. They assumed we would collapse in on ourselves, wither and fade into obscurity. They envisioned the last remnants of our people scavenging the bones of abandoned colonies, drifting like ghosts through the remains of a dream that had been stolen from us. But humanity does not break. The Concord failed to understand the fire that burned within us, the indomitable will that had carried us from the depths of our own primitive struggles to the stars themselves. We had clawed our way through ice ages, through wars that reshaped continents, through disasters that would have extinguished lesser species. We had endured before, and we would endure again. The first years were the hardest. The scattered survivors of exile struggled against the merciless void. Entire colonies went dark. Hunger and despair threatened to do what the conquered had failed to accomplish. But in the silence of the abyss, something awakened, a resolve unlike anything before. The weak perished, the strong hardened, and through it all, humanity adapted. We became something else. Without the bureaucratic chains of the Concord holding us back, science and innovation accelerated at a pace unseen in known history. We were no longer bound by their archaic doctrines, their limitations on what could or could not be pursued. In the shadows of exile, we experimented, we forged, we evolved. Deep in the uncharted sectors of space, beyond the reach of any conquered, Patrol, a hidden world, became the heart of our resurgence. A barren wasteland, once deemed uninhabitable, transformed into the forge of our reckoning. We built in silence, not mere ships, but something more, something greater. A warship unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. It was a culmination of everything humanity had learned. Every war, every battle, every desperate fight for survival, poured into its design. Forged from the strongest alloys, powered by engines that defied conventional physics, and armed with weapons so advanced they bordered on the edge of science fiction. It was not just a machine, it was a message, a statement. We had not been broken, we had not been defeated, and now, we were returning. The first sign of our return was subtle, almost imperceptible. A long-abandoned relay station at the edge of conquered space suddenly flickered to life. Faint signals pulsed through the dark, an encrypted whisper that sent a ripple of unease through those who intercepted it. At first, it was dismissed as a glitch, a malfunction of old machinery left to decay. But then came the anomalies. Shifting energy signatures, unexplainable movements detected in the deepest void. Shadows, where there should have been nothing. The Concord's highest officials were alerted, their encrypted channels filled with hushed conversations and frantic speculation. Patrols were doubled, probes were sent. But the truth was already clear. Something was coming. And then, on the outskirts of a quiet star system, a lone vessel appeared. It did not match any known Concord design. It bore no markings, no identification, no record in any database. It moved, like a phantom, impossibly fast, defying every expectation of mass and momentum, a ship that should not have existed. The Concord's fleet scrambled, their admirals demanding answers. They sent a single transmission across the void, their words heavy with uncertainty. Identify yourself. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, a single reply crackled through the void. "We are humanity, and we have returned." The transmission echoed through conquered command centers like a ghostly whisper from a long-buried past. The name, humanity, was one that had not been spoken in official circles for centuries. To the younger generations of the conquered, it was nothing more than an old legend, a cautionary tale told by their elders about a species that had reached too far, too fast, and paid the ultimate price. But to those who had been there, those who had witnessed the exile, it was something far more terrifying. On the bridge of the conquered Central Fleet Station, High Admiral Zaylan of the Ilvar Dominion watched the data scroll across his screens with narrowed eyes. It was impossible. Humanity was gone, stripped of power, left to wither in the uncharted depths of space. And yet, here they were. The sensor readings made no sense. The ship hovering on the edge of their sector was not just advanced. It was impossible. Concorde scanners struggled to make sense of its hull composition, flickering between contradictory readings. Some claimed it was made of exotic alloys unseen in any known database, while others reported that it was absorbing scans entirely, as if it were cloaked in a void of its own making. The ship was not simply stealthy. It was unreadable, and that was terrifying. Admiral Zealand took a slow breath, his mind racing through potential responses. His instincts screamed at him to call for reinforcements, to bring the full might of the fleet down upon this anomaly before it could become a threat. But something stopped him, the way the ship just hovered there, waiting, watching. It did not act like an invader, nor did it lash out in provocation. It was a statement, a declaration of presence. Humanity had returned, and they wanted the Concorde to know. A war council was convened within the hour. The highest-ranking officials from the ruling species of the Concorde gathered in a vast chamber, their holograms flickering to life around a massive circular table. The tension was thick, almost suffocating, as they analyzed the fragmented data coming in from every sector. "This is a bluff," one of the officials scoffed, a reptilian warlord from the Tassari Imperium, his ridged brow furrowed in disbelief. Humanity cannot have survived, not in exile. They had nothing. If they had nothing, came the measured response of an elder diplomat from the Athari Commonwealth. Then what exactly are we looking at? A hologram of the unidentified warship hovered above the table, rotating slowly. Its design was unlike anything the Concorde had ever encountered. It was sleek, predatory, with an angular hull that seemed to drink in the light around it. The ship radiated power, yet it bore no markings of allegiance, no insignias, no designation codes. A voice crackled through the chamber's speakers. The intercepted transmission replayed for all to hear. "We are humanity, and we have returned." The silence that followed was heavy, punctuated only by the flickering hum of the hologram. One of the Concorde's grand strategists, a venerable mind that had orchestrated countless wars, finally spoke. "If they have returned, we must assume they have been preparing. The question is, for what?" The answer would come sooner than any of them expected. On the outskirts of the Concorde's territory, hidden from prying eyes, the rest of humanity's fleet lay in wait. It was a sight that would have shaken the core of any Concorde officer who laid eyes upon it. Hundreds of ships, each unlike anything seen in the known galaxy, hovered in the abyss like silent sentinels. They were not the crude vessels of a desperate species clinging to survival. These were warships of the highest caliber, forged in exile, built with a singular purpose. Vast dreadnoughts, their hulls shimmering with an eerie, near-organic luster, carried weaponry that pulsed with the energy of technology far beyond what the Concorde had ever permitted in its space. Sleek corvettes darted between them, their designs optimized for maneuverability, for hit-and-run strikes that could leave entire fleets in ruins before the enemy even knew what had hit them. And at the center of it all, looming like a titan among gods, was the flagship, the Excalibur. Its very name was a whisper from Earth's past, a legend reborn into steel and fire. Larger than any known battleship, it carried the heart of humanity's vengeance within its core, a fusion of science and warfare, of knowledge gathered in exile and refined into something the Concorde had never dared imagine. Deep within the Excalibur, a figure stood before a vast command deck, watching as the Concorde's fleet stirred in response to their arrival. The High Commander of humanity's lost armada. They had spent centuries in the dark, gathering knowledge, perfecting their craft, honing themselves into something the Concorde could never have anticipated. The war machine that the Concorde had feared humanity might become had finally been realized. A voice spoke from behind the commander, one of the strategists who had guided humanity's resurgence. The Concorde is moving. They will not ignore this. The commander's gaze did not waver from the screen. Good. It is time they remembered what they tried to forget. The first phase of humanity's return had begun. Across the Concorde's central worlds, the news spread like wildfire. Humanity had returned. It was impossible, unthinkable, but the evidence was undeniable. A single warship had revealed itself on the border of Concorde-controlled space, and the mere sight of it had sent tremors through the highest levels of power. Now, the Concorde faced a choice: respond with diplomacy, or with overwhelming force. The Concorde's fractured response. In the heart of the Concorde's ruling capital, a war council raged on. The gathered leaders of the galaxy's most powerful species debated furiously, their voices rising in frustration and fear. The reappearance of humanity was an existential crisis, one they had believed resolved long ago. They were supposed to be gone, bellowed the Tassari warlord, his emerald-hued scales flaring in agitation. How did they survive? How did they build something so formidable? A cautious Ithari diplomat, her luminous silver eyes filled with concern, studied the latest reports. We don't yet know the full scope of their capabilities. Attacking immediately may be unwise. They are one ship, a Zalari strategist hissed, his long insectoid limbs tapping against the war table. One. We strike now, and we crush this problem before it spreads. But then the most damning report arrived. A new wave of sensor data streamed into the council chamber. The warship, previously thought to be alone, was not alone at all. Fleet reconnaissance patrols had intercepted readings from deep space outposts along the Concorde's outer rim. At first, the signals had been dismissed as mere ghost readings, strange anomalies with no immediate significance. But upon closer examination, a terrifying truth emerged. Humanity's warship was not an isolated relic of a lost species. It was the spearhead. Hundreds of vessels lurked just beyond the Concorde's borders, their presence hidden within the deep void. They had been waiting, biding their time, watching. A cold silence settled over the chamber. The meaning was clear. Humanity had not merely returned. They had come prepared. The unfolding standoff as news spread across the Concorde's vast interstellar empire. Fleets were mobilized. Warships were recalled from distant outposts. Military installations were put on high alert, and defense grids were reinforced. But the question remained: what did humanity want? The Excalibur, humanity's flagship, remained motionless on the edge of conquered territory, its intentions unreadable. It did not advance. It did not retreat. It merely waited. And then came the message. A second transmission, directed specifically at the Concorde's leadership, was delivered across every secured communication channel. It was brief, but its meaning was clear. We remember. The words carried an undeniable weight. The Concorde had tried to erase humanity from history, to cast them out into the void and ensure they never returned. But now, after centuries, the exiled species had not only survived, they had thrived. And they had not forgotten. The secret of humanity's survival. But how had humanity endured? How had they, a species exiled with no resources, no allies, and no infrastructure, managed to defy the odds and build a fleet capable of standing against the might of the Concorde? The answer lay in the shadows of uncharted space. When humanity had been banished, the Concorde believed they would wither away, fragmented and broken. And in truth, the early years of exile had been brutal. The remnants of humanity were scattered, their colonies abandoned, their technology outdated. Survival had seemed impossible. But humanity was never a species that surrendered to fate. They had pushed deeper into the unknown, farther than any species had dared venture. They discovered dark, ancient systems untouched by the conquered, where dead civilizations had left behind ruins of unimaginable power. They uncovered technologies that defied the understanding of even the most advanced races of the conquered, and they learned. For centuries, humanity had lived in the shadows, growing stronger, developing technologies that the Concord had outlawed out of fear. They had built warships that could defy conventional physics, weapons that could tear through entire fleets in a single strike. They had been waiting for the right moment. And now, that moment had come. The Concord's first move. The Concord could not afford hesitation. The sight of humanity's war fleet lurking on their borders had ignited widespread panic. If the rulers of the Concord did nothing, fear would consume their empire. A decision was made. A fleet, one of the Concord's largest and most powerful, was assembled. 2,000 ships, armed with the most advanced weapons available, set course for the border. Their mission was clear: confront the human warship and issue a final demand: surrender, or be annihilated. But as the Concord's fleet approached the Excalibur, something happened that none of them could have expected. The human ship finally moved, not forward, not toward the Concord fleet. Instead, it shifted subtly, as if acknowledging their presence. And then, in a display of technological superiority that sent shockwaves through the Concord's ranks, the Excalibur simply vanished. No energy surge, no visible distortion, just an instantaneous disappearance. The Concord's sensors scrambled to track it, scanning every possible frequency. They searched for gravitational fluctuations, tachyon trails, even the faintest. Warp distortions, nothing. The ship was gone. Panic rippled through the Concord's armada. How had it disappeared? Where had it gone? Then, a chilling realization dawned upon them. If humanity had developed this level of technology, this level of control over space itself, then they had no idea where the rest of the fleet truly was. For all they knew, humanity's warships could already be inside conquered territory. They could be hidden near critical infrastructure, poised to strike at any moment. This was not an invasion. This was psychological warfare, and humanity was winning. The disappearance of the Excalibur sent a shockwave through the Concord's fleet. Veteran commanders, battle-hardened admirals, and top-ranking strategists found themselves gripped by an unfamiliar sensation: fear. This was no longer a simple confrontation. This was a game of shadows, a battle of wits and technology where humanity held the upper hand. And if the Conquered had learned anything from history, it was this: a cornered human was dangerous. The Ghost Fleet panic spread through the ranks as every ship in the Conquered Armada scrambled to locate the missing vessel. Scanners worked overtime, hyperspace trackers were engaged, and deep space relay stations were flooded with distress signals. But no matter how many systems they checked, no matter how many signals they intercepted, they all came back with the same result. The Excalibur was simply gone. It hadn't fled. It hadn't retreated. It had simply ceased to exist within known space. Then the first ships began to vanish. Not human ships. Concord ships. One by one, vessels along the outer rim of the fleet began disappearing from sensors. There was no explosion, no distress call, just a flicker on the screen, and then nothing. Frantic reports flooded in. A cruiser had disappeared from formation, then a battleship, then an entire wing of destroyers. Admiral Kareth, the Supreme, commander of the Concord's fleet, felt a growing dread settle in his gut. This was impossible. The Concord had the largest, most advanced navy in the galaxy. Their ships were equipped with counter-stealth measures, quantum tracking systems, and emergency warp protocols. And yet, something was hunting them. Something human. Humanity's revenge. Silent and unseen, aboard one of the hidden warships of the Terran Exile fleet, Captain Elias Ward watched the chaos unfold. His crew worked in perfect coordination, their hands moving across holographic control interfaces with practiced precision. The Concord's arrogance had blinded them. They had believed humanity's exile would weaken them. Instead, it had forged them into something far more dangerous than the Concord had ever anticipated. The Excalibur had been bait, a distraction. While the Concord focused their efforts on a single warship, the true danger had already infiltrated their ranks. Advanced, human stealth ships had slipped into formation, using exotic cloaking technology that the Concord had never even dreamed of. Each vessel carried weapons unlike anything the galaxy had seen. Silent, invisible assassins that could tear entire warships apart before their victims even knew they were under attack. And now, the hunt had begun. The strike begins. The first attack came without warning. A Concord dreadnought, one of the largest warships in the fleet, suffered a catastrophic systems failure. Its reactors flickered, its engines stuttered, and then, as if by some unseen force, the ship detonated from within. There was no enemy fire, no external impact. It simply ceased to function. Panic gripped the remaining fleet. More ships began to fail. Systems locked up, communications were scrambled, and life support systems flickered erratically. It was as if some unseen force was reaching into the heart of their warships, tearing them apart from the inside. They were under attack, and they had no way to fight back. In the chaos, Admiral Kyrith finally gave the order. All ships, full retreat. Get out of here, now. But it was already too late. The shadows were closing in, the legacy of the exiles, while the conquered fleet struggled to regroup. A single transmission was broadcast across all channels. It was not a threat. It was not a demand. It was a declaration, a human voice, calm and unwavering, echoed across the void. You tried to erase us. You failed. The message was followed by a data burst, one, that spread across the Concord's entire communications network in seconds. The moment the data was decrypted, every leader in the Concord knew their worst nightmare had come true. The transmission contained coordinates, deep space observatories, sensor stations, and classified military outposts, every single one of them. Now displayed the same readings. Humanity's fleet was not just lurking beyond the border, it was everywhere. The revelation that shook the galaxy. For centuries, the Conquered had believed humanity was gone. But the truth was far worse. The exiled humans had not just survived, they had evolved. They had built fleets in the void, constructed entire civilizations in the farthest reaches of the galaxy, and developed technologies that the Concord could barely comprehend. They had prepared for this moment, and now, the Conquered faced the cold reality of their mistake. This was no longer about a single warship. This was about the return of a species they had wronged. And humanity did not come in peace. The realization that humanity had returned, stronger, more advanced and utterly unforgiving, sent the Concord spiraling into chaos. The highest-ranking officials of the Grand Council were hastily summoned to an emergency session, their voices trembling with disbelief as they reviewed the evidence before them. Every classified Concord system had detected the same chilling truth. Human warships had infiltrated deep into their space, hiding in the void, moving unseen, striking with absolute precision. The mightiest fleet in the galaxy was being dismantled, one ship at a time, and worst of all, humanity had not yet revealed its full strength. The Phantom War begins aboard the Excalibur. Captain Elias Ward stood on the command deck, watching the disarray unfold across intercepted Concord transmissions. His expression was one of quiet satisfaction. This was more than a battle. It was a reckoning. We let them believe they won, Ward murmured, his eyes scanning the deep space tactical display. And now, they don't even know how to fight back. Humanity had spent centuries perfecting a new form of warfare, one the Concord had never encountered before. The exiled Terran fleets had developed Phantom Strike Doctrine, a method of waging war that made brute force obsolete. Instead of massive, drawn-out battles, humanity's forces struck surgically, attacking key infrastructure, jamming critical communications, and disabling vital logistics networks. Instead of engaging head-on, they infiltrated. Instead of overwhelming firepower, they used targeted obliteration. A Concord battleship might possess firepower to level a city, but that firepower was useless when its engines mysteriously failed, when its weapons refused to function, or when its reactor inexplicably went into meltdown. This was war at its most insidious, a war of shadows, A galaxy that no longer belonged to the Concord in the heart of the Concord's capital. The Supreme High Chancellor of the Grand Council, the highest authority in the known galaxy, stood in the war chamber, his face pale as the latest report was read aloud. More than 70 vessels lost, no survivors, no enemy signatures detected, no signs of conventional weaponry. Silence filled the chamber. The conquered had ruled through overwhelming might, through the belief that they were invincible. And yet, in less than a standard week, their fleet had suffered more losses than in the last 1,000 years combined, and the humans were just getting started. Then came the second blow, one that sent shockwaves through every corner of the Empire. Independent systems, long subjugated under conquered rule, began receiving transmissions from humanity. The messages were simple, direct: "We have returned. The conquered is weak. Rise." The exiles hadn't just come for revenge. They had come to end an empire. The final warning. The war was no longer contained to the depths of space. Sabotage swept through conquered facilities. Supply lines vanished overnight. Tactical AI systems malfunctioned at critical moments. It was as if humanity had infiltrated every level of the Empire's infrastructure before they even realized it. Desperation crept into the voices of conquered leaders as they issued command after command, trying to restore order. The military was ordered to double planetary defenses. Civilian travel was restricted. Border systems were placed under full lockdown. None of it mattered, because deep in the void, the true human fleet was gathering. The Excalibur had been the first warship to be seen, but it was only the tip of the spear. The fleet that had been banished for centuries was no longer in exile, and they carried weapons the likes of which the galaxy had never seen. Then, across every channel, every display, every communication network, in the entire conquered territory, a single message appeared. It was not a request. It was not a threat. It was a final warning. A cold, calm human voice echoed across the stars. "We are coming." The countdown to extinction panic gripped the Concord's highest command. Every military officer, every governor, every ruling official knew what this meant. This was no rebellion. This was humanity's war of retribution. The exiled species they had cast into the void had returned, smarter, deadlier, and unshackled by the limitations of conventional warfare. For centuries, the conquered had ruled by fear, but now they were the ones afraid. And across the dark expanse of space, unseen by any Concord sensor, thousands of human warships silently drifted into formation, waiting for the order to strike. The stars themselves were about to tremble. The final days of the Concord's dominion had begun, though few within its ranks could yet admit it. Their mighty fleets still patrolled the stars. Their warships still gleamed with the pride of an empire that had once claimed absolute supremacy. But beneath the surface, deep in the corridors of power, fear had taken root. And fear was the first crack in an empire's foundation, because the truth was undeniable. Humanity had returned, and it had done so with the precision of a cosmic executioner. The Great Disruption, what had once been the most stable empire in galactic history, was now an empire on the brink. Across conquered space, entire systems went dark without warning. Convoys ceased arriving. Orbital trade stations reported catastrophic malfunctions, their automated defenses turning on their own fleets. Warships vanished, their crews never heard from again. The military, once the Concord's greatest pride, was reduced to a force that could no longer trust its own technology, because humanity had infiltrated it. The Empire's reliance on centralized AI coordination had been its greatest strength, and its greatest weakness. And now, the exiled species had turned that weakness into a weapon. The first real blow came at Zenthari Prime, the Concord's most fortified military stronghold. The Planetary Defense Network, a system that had stood, undefeated for 12,000 years, went silent. The Concorde scrambled to restore control. Every alarm was tripped, every override command initiated. It was useless. In a matter of minutes, the automated planetary defenses, once designed to repel entire armadas, turned on their own forces. Orbital turrets ripped through Concorde warships, as if they were mere training drones. The planet's defense grid, once a symbol of eternal security, became its executioner, and then, from the depths of space, they arrived. The Excalibur emerged first, its onyx hull gleaming with the cold precision of a weapon built not just for war but for vengeance, and behind it, a storm of human warships broke through the void. They did not announce their presence with grand proclamations. They did not demand surrender. They simply attacked. The unleashing of human power. The battle for Zenthari Prime was over before it truly began. Human vessels moved like predators among prey, darting between Concord formations, shredding through warships that had once been thought indestructible. The Concord's admirals, seasoned veterans of countless conflicts, had never witnessed anything like this. Their fleets had been designed for orderly warfare, for battles of formation, for engagements where sheer numbers dictated the outcome. But the humans did not fight by Concord rules. They hunted. Stealth corvettes darted through the battlefield, delivering pinpoint strikes that disabled engines and crippled reactors before vanishing into the abyss. AI-driven drones swarmed through enemy ranks, overriding Concord targeting systems, turning their own weapons against them. And then came the dreadnoughts. The exiled fleets had not spent centuries idle. They had built monsters, ships of unimaginable size and firepower, each one carrying 1,000 lifetimes of hatred forged into weaponry. The Leviathan, a warship so vast that its shadow alone consumed entire Concord battle groups, unleashed a weapon that had never been seen before in this galaxy. The first blast tore through Zenthari Prime's orbital dockyards like paper, reducing centuries of Concord engineering to cosmic debris. The second broke the planet itself. The fall of Zenthari Prime. The Concord had never known planetary devastation at this scale, not since their conquest of humanity's homeworld, Earth. For the first time, it was they who were forced to flee. Survivors scrambled to evacuate. High-ranking officers abandoned their fleets, and transmissions from the Concord's ruling council became desperate, disjointed pleas for intervention. But there was no intervention. There was no last-minute rescue. There was only the judgment of an exiled people who had been cast into the dark, and had returned as the storm itself. Zenthari Prime, the unbreakable stronghold, fell in less than an hour, and across the stars, humanity's warning echoed again, now no longer a threat, but a statement of fact. We have returned. Your rule is over. The breaking point. The fall of Zenthari Prime sent shockwaves through the galaxy. For the first time in recorded history, the Concord lost control of its own dominion. Its puppet states, once too afraid to rebel, began rising up. Its military, once the most powerful in the known universe, fractured. The lie of Concord invincibility had been shattered, and in the heart of their empire, the Concord's supreme chancellor stood before a desperate assembly of warlords, strategists, and advisors, his voice a whisper of disbelief. They aren't just attacking us, he exhaled, shaking his head. They are erasing us. And as he spoke, new reports flooded in. New human fleets had been spotted. Another stronghold had gone dark. The war was no longer about territories. It was no longer about control. It was about annihilation. And the exiles, the species that had been cast out to die, had made their decision. The conquered would not be allowed to surrender. They would burn, and humanity would be the fire. The conquered had ruled for millennia, a regime so vast and so entrenched that even the thought of its fall had once been unthinkable. Yet now, it was no longer a question of survival. It was a question of how long they had left. Humanity had returned, not as wayward exiles seeking to reclaim lost honor, but as a storm of vengeance, sweeping through the stars with ruthless precision. They did not occupy. They did not conquer. They erased. Worlds that had once been the foundation of the Concord's dominion, planets where great fleets were built, where decisions that shaped the fate of billions had been made, were now little, more than debris drifting in the void. The human war machine was unstoppable, and as the last great battle loomed, one final question remained. Would the Concord die screaming, or would they be wiped away before they even had the chance? The final stand of the Concordan, a desperate attempt to salvage what remained of their crumbling empire. The last remnants of the Concord's ruling council convened aboard Derek Thule Station, an immense command fortress located in the dead heart of the galaxy. It was their last stronghold, their final rallying point. Surrounding it was the largest fleet ever assembled in conquered history. Tens of thousands of warships, dreadnoughts the size of cities, carriers that housed entire armies. The Conquered's leaders believed that here, at the heart of their remaining strength, they could at last turn the tide. But deep down, they knew. The storm was coming, and nothing would stop it. The moment humanity arrived, the battle was over before it began. The fleet emerged from the abyss, warships unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The Excalibur led the charge, its hull gleaming in the dying light of the Conquered's empire. Its weapon systems activated, and the void itself shook as it opened fire. Accompanying it were hundreds of warships, each one forged in exile, hardened by suffering, refined by centuries of preparation for this very moment. The human fleet descended upon the Concorde with terrifying precision. They did not fight like the Concorde's old enemies. They did not seek to engage in drawn-out battles of attrition. They struck fast. They struck hard. And with each passing moment, the largest fleet in Concorde history collapsed. The wrath of the exiles, the Supreme Chancellor watched in horror from the bridge of his personal dreadnought, unable to process what was happening. "Impossible," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the frantic screams of his commanders. He had been raised to believe in the absolute supremacy of the Conquered, that their fleets were untouchable, their dominion unchallenged. And yet, before his eyes, warships that had stood as symbols of absolute power were torn apart like fragile glass. Massive dreadnoughts, once the pride of the Empire, shattered under the sheer force of human weaponry. The Concorde's greatest commanders, battle-hardened strategists who had crushed 100 rebellions, could do nothing but watch as their fleets were dismantled with terrifying efficiency. The Excalibur carved a path through the enemy ranks, its weapons devastating everything in its wake. Plasma lances, railgun bombardments, hyper-accelerated kinetic rounds. Humanity had mastered every form of warfare, and they wielded it all at once. And then, the final weapon was unleashed. A singularity torpedo. A forbidden technology. Humanity had perfected in exile, was launched straight at Darak Thul Station. There was no explosion. There was no warning. Only silence. The fabric of reality itself bent as the torpedo detonated, ripping open a wound in space-time. A gravitational anomaly formed, collapsing the fortress, and everything around it, into a singularity from which nothing could escape. The Concorde's last stronghold, its heart, its mind, its soul, was consumed in an instant, and with it, so ended their empire. The end of an empire, the beginning of a legend. In the aftermath, the silence of space felt different. For the first time in thousands of years, there was no Conquered. There were no warships bearing its insignia, no rulers sitting atop golden thrones dictating the fate of lesser species. There was only humanity. The galaxy trembled in the face of this new reality. The exiles had returned, not to rule, but to remind the universe of one undeniable truth. Humanity does not kneel, humanity does not forget, and when wronged, humanity does not forgive. The name of Earth, once spoken in hushed tones as a relic of the past, now carried a weight that could shake the stars themselves. Across the cosmos, species who had once turned a blind eye to humanity's suffering bowed, their heads in silence. Some celebrated the fall of the Conquered. Others whispered in fear. Because if humanity could destroy the most powerful empire in history, who could possibly stop them now? Final words. And so the legend of the exiles was born. It would be told for generations. For some, it would be a tale of justice long overdue. For others, a warning. A reminder of what happens when you cross the wrong species. But for humanity, it was simply the first chapter in a new era, one where the stars, for the first time in history, truly belonged to them. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Let's keep exploring the cosmos together, because the universe is vast, and we're just getting started.